Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a remarkable show for you all today. Briahna, let's get right to it, shall we?
All right, Robby. Well, first up, a Russian fighter jet was downed a U.S. drone over the Black Sea on Tuesday morning. According to reports, the American surveillance drone was operating in international waters when the Russian aircraft dumped the fuel on the vessel and damaged its propellers, forcing it down. Now, this is the first direct military confrontation between Russia and the United States since the Ukraine war started.
White House National Security spokesman John Kirby acknowledged that it isn't uncommon for Russia to intercept American aircraft, but claimed that yesterday's incident was notable. Here he is on CNN yesterday.
We don't want to see this war escalate beyond what it already has done to the Ukrainian people, and so this was inappropriate, unsafe, unprofessional conduct by the Russian pilots.
Now, Russia hit out at the U.S. military overnight, calling for the immediate stoppage of hostile activity using U.S. military aircraft near the Russian border. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin replied this morning, quote, "The United States will continue to fly and to operate wherever international law allows. It is incumbent upon Russia to operate its aircraft in a safe and professional manner." So this was over international waters. We did have a right to be there. Russia should not have taken this action, clearly. All that said, I think it's important to be careful about how we characterize this, and also, think through what our military commitment is here in Ukraine. Every incident like this, there's like a small, microscopic, hopefully, chance that this spirals out of control and has World War III. I mean, that was the Cuban Missile Crisis, yes. Right? A series of mistakes that almost bring us to the brink of catastrophe. So when you have a war footing with a superpower that's nuclear capable, you run the risk of little things like this being the spark that sets off the great conflagration.
Yeah, this is exactly what experts in nuclear escalation have been warning about since this war started. People like Andrew Coburn have pointed out that there are a lot of things with respect to both our escalation and nuclear policy over the last 30 years or so that make these kinds of confrontations more high risk than they would be in other kinds of situations. So, for example, the fact that there's been this move towards smaller nukes that are easier to use, the fact of our putting troops and weapons closer and closer to these border areas. You bring up the Cuban Missile Crisis. Of course, there's something very rich about the United States saying, of course, we can put our weapons anywhere we want as long as it doesn't violate international law, when we obviously threw such a fit about Russia doing the same thing in a country that was much farther away than from us than what we're doing right now in Ukraine. So, you can say what's legal, what's strictly legal, but the whole problem here is that as we continue to send longer range weapons and the like to Ukraine, you're going to increasingly get in situations where the lines are really blurred, and people are going to be able to use pretexts to escalate in a way that could be incredibly dangerous.
And we get to a point where we are just fighting a war with Russia. It's a proxy conflict right now because we're funding the Ukrainian opposition, we're giving them weapons, and then they're using the actual soldiers to fight Ukraine, or to fight Russia. But the longer this goes on, the more this just becomes like everyone can see through the smoke and mirrors here. We are engaged with Russia in some degree, and we've never, we've never declared this war. Congress didn't vote on it. Do the American people agree to go to World War III potentially with Russia? Of course they don't. Of course no one thinks Ukrainians keeping every inch of territory that they control before Russia invaded is enough of a compelling U.S. national security goal to start World War III over. No one thinks that.
Yeah.
Except maybe the Biden administration. Maybe they don't think it. They're saying it. Maybe they don't think it.
Yeah, fighting to the last.
But they're willing to say it.
And look, there's increasingly discussion, and I think it's a good thing, about how bad faith some of the approach of the West has been. More increasing reporting about efforts to derail negotiations historically. Now, things are changing a little bit, right? We're getting more and more stories that are critical of Ukraine, and some people say that it marks a pivot where the administration is willing to say that there's going to be some end game here. There was, of course, the story about the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, where the U.S. begs off its personal responsibility in the Cy Hirsch reporting, but then points to, this yacht that was allegedly launched by a pro-Ukrainian group. And some people say the fact that the U.S. is pointing to a pro-Ukrainian group is more evidence that it's distancing itself from this kind of unqualified support that it was offering earlier. But also, there's bad faith kind of rationale for the attacks for the war continues. One kind of hilarious moment in the context of this drone downing is a report from CNN, which notes that the U.S. called Russia's actions here reckless and environmentally unsound and unprofessional. So they point to the fact that this Russian ship released gas on the drone to down it as, among all other things, an environmental catastrophe, completely ignoring that the Nord Stream disaster was the biggest methane leak in global history, probably outside of, I don't know, some volcanic eruption or something during when the dinosaurs were walking the planet. And it's, again, one of these examples where I'm not going to call this a kind of a woke framing, but there's this interest in talking about things that are kind of left-leaning issues, environmentalism. There's been, I think, a focus on LGBT rights in Russia, things that are legitimately important, but which are being weaponized in this case to make the case for why America should be supported uncritically when they really have nothing to do with each other.
Sure. And just say that. That's not what the Biden administration is acknowledging. It's deceptive. We can just say, look, Russia is our geopolitical main foe. I mean, I think some people would say, well, they're actually not our geopolitical main foe. But if the Biden administration wants to make that case and say, look, the Ukrainians are committing we don't even have to commit ground forces. The Ukrainians are supplying that. Why wouldn't we, in some realpolitik kind of sense, seek to contain them through this means? But that's not what they're saying. They're saying democracy is at stake because the Zelensky regime is threatened.
Yeah. Well, President Biden is facing harsh criticism from the right over the drone downing. Let's look in on what Sean Hannity had to say last night.
America's enemies are on the move. They are aggressive. They are consolidating power. They're creating partnerships and alliances that the world better take note of while Joe Biden, your president, is asleep at the wheel. Russia and Putin took out an American drone over international waters. And I ask again, Joe Biden, what are you going to do?
And it didn't stop there. Here's what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say on the program.
So President Biden, you're the Rodney Dangerfield of world leaders. Nobody respects you. And if you don't change your game and up your game, we're going to have World War III. Here's the next war that's coming. Israel is going to have to take military action to stop the Iranians from developing enriched uranium to the point it can become a weapon. They're at 84%. All they have to do is get to 90%. We're not doing a damn thing about the Iranians trying to develop a nuclear bomb under our plain sight.
So that, to me, is the kind of hawkish posturing from conservatives that doesn't really make a lot of sense and isn't particularly intellectually consistent. Because, Lindsey Graham and Sean Hannity there are saying, why isn't Biden saying there's going to be consequence? Why isn't he doing something about it? But he is doing something about it. He's fighting a proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. And maybe not Hannity and Lindsey Graham, but certainly other conservatives, including others on Fox News, like Tucker Carlson, think that that's a bad idea. But so you can't have it both ways. If you want Biden to do more to punish Russia for its actions, that's more of what he's doing right now. If you think now, I don't agree with that. I think the risk of World War III is more pronounced by actually being on the path we're on now to supplying the Ukrainian opposition with weapons. I want cooler heads to prevail. So getting really worked up at Russia about this drone being shot down does not lead us to a safer position. Yeah,
look, this goes back to the traditional Republican posture that existed before this kind of new Trump populism.
I think it's a reflex that they sometimes just go toward.
It's what used to happen whenever there was a Democratic president in office, that they would be characterized as weak on Russia, weak on China, weak on various Arab countries in the Middle East, and Republicans were the ones that were willing to go to war and do what needed to be done in support of the troops, and that was the framing that we used to have. These days, there's been some mixed messaging out of the Republican Party. I think the ideological diversity is frankly refreshing, but it's not especially helpful when they're beating the drums of war.
And Democrats, to be clear, are not immune to that reflex whatsoever. Despite many of them will signal or used to at least, now they're so caught up in Ukrainian national identity, I don't even know what to think, but would talk a good game on non-intervention, and then every time something like this happens, then they're just as hawkish as any neocon on the other side. Now more of the neocons are in the Democratic coalition anyway, so it's further confused.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to your radar, Briahna. That'll be up next. Please stay with us.